What does that remind you of? Act 1, Scene 1. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
Yes?
May I speak to Mr. Beresford, please?
No, I'm sorry. I'm afraid he's on the continent, on business.
This is Miss Vera Packard, from Sunny Ridge.
I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you.
Your husband's aunt died in the night.
Oh dear. Poor Ada.
I realise this is not a good time, but I'll be in touch concerning funeral arrangements
And the transfer of her belongings to your husband.
Oh, that's the last of it. You could sign this, Mum.
All right. Now, are you sure that painting was Ada Beresford's? I don't remember it from her room. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mum.
Tommy, I'm writing down certain matters which have come to my knowledge in recent days here at Sunny Ridge. I believe there's a murderer at large. Mrs. Lancaster is not safe. I will remain watchful and shall record facts as they become clear to me. But if I should die, Tommy, look to the painting and for God's sakes, use your intelligence.
Hello?
Hello, this is Christopher Beresford's mother. May I speak with him, please?
He's on a field trip this week, Mrs. Beresford.
I see. Well, would you leave a message with Judith that her father's out of the country and that I'd like to speak with her?
I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Goodbye. Andrew, I think there's been a problem with Aunt Ada's death. I think she's been murdered. So, if you speak to your brother or sister, could you ask them to call me, please?
Have you been drinking again, Mother?
No?
Dad'll be home in a few days, won't he? Mother?
Yes, darling.
Mrs. Beresford.
Yes. Good afternoon.
What can I do for you? Ada's funeral isn't until Monday.
No, I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions.
Have all her belongings arrived safely?
No. That's just it. There's a painting amongst Ada's things which didn't belong to her. It's rather an attractive picture of a house in the woods. I'm sure she'd have wanted it returned to the rightful owner.
No, it was hers. It was a gift from Mrs. Lancaster.
Oh.
She had it in her room and Ada had always admired it.
May I speak with Mrs. Lancaster?
I'm afraid she doesn't live with us anymore. Her relatives came for her a couple of days ago. It was all rather sudden. Excuse me, please. Both have some.
Both of whom?
Oh, excuse me, I was just talking to myself. I'm not sitting on your bench, am I?
Oh, I don't live here. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of Marjorie Moody's. We were neighbours in our village, St. Mary Mead. I couldn't help overhearing, but were you asking about the disappearance of Mrs. Lancaster?
Disappearance?
I'm here today because Marjorie has phoned me. She's distressed at what she saw the night Mrs. Lancaster left and your aunt died. You are a relative of Ada Beresford.
Yes.
What is it?
Oh, it's probably nothing. I don't know. Ada left a letter to be read after her death.
What did she write?
She wrote it the day before she died. Mrs. Lancaster is not safe. And within 24 hours, she's dead and Mrs. Lancaster's been taken away. And when I was last here, Mrs. Lancaster said she knew where a child was buried. That's what she said. And that someone was going to come for her. I think both friends discovered the identity of a murderer, Miss Marple. And now both of them are gone.
Marjorie, can you tell Mrs. Beresford why you think Mrs. Lancaster was taken against her will?
Well, she was. I've said it once and I'll say it again.
Go on, then.
You were sitting there?
I was. I keep watch.
And you'd fallen asleep?
I was woken by a noise.
Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I don't want to go with you.
Oh, my God.
Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Don't let him. Don't. Come back. Come back. And then Ada died, and they'd become so close.
Did you see the person taking her?
One eye.
The person only had one eye?
No, the car only had one eye.
One eye. And Mrs. Lancaster said that there was a child buried behind the fireplace in the sun lounge.
In my sun lounge?
I think that both she and Ada had discovered the identity of a murderer.
Mrs. Beresford, never a day goes by without some pearl of paranoia from the dear ladies that live here. Only last year, Mrs. Eburn left a note in her will claiming to be Copenhagen, the Duke of Wellington's favourite horse.
But Ada was as sharp as a knife. For her to write this seems so out of character, unless it was true.
You saw her maybe once every 2 years, Mrs. Beresford? How do you know it was out of character? Did you know Ada had been diagnosed with a heart complaint and wasn't expected to live much longer?
No, I was unaware of that.
Your husband was?
So, do you think we shouldn't go to the police about this?
There was nothing suspicious about her death.
Do you have a forwarding address for Mrs. Lancaster?
Of course.
Maybe it's still possible to forward that painting.
Care of the Cleveland Hotel, Piccadilly. And here's the solicitors we dealt with while her relatives were in Africa.
The relative who came to collect her?
Mrs. Johnson.
Mrs. Johnson.
Get in a taxi, quick.
Where are we going?
Get in, go. To the nearest police station, please. It's Miss Packard. She's the murderer.
Really?
I have the proof of my own eyes. I saw her. She doesn't know this, but I saw her spiking the medicine with poison, with arsenic or strychnine.
I don't think it is Miss Packard.
Why not?
Because Miss Packard has always reminded me of lovely Mrs. Dickens, the publican's wife in St. Mary Mead. She's very kind, very dependable. The last person you'd think of criminal behaviour. Like when things were tight after the war, the gin and whiskey always seemed a little watered down. This bottle you saw her spike, was it large and blue?
Yes.
Oh, that'd be the tonic. Very expensive. I wouldn't be surprised if Miss Packard was helping it go a bit further.
You mean she was diluting it?
I know for a fact that Miss Packard has a good heart. Marjorie's funds ran out during last year, and she insisted on letting her